As founder of Robot Overlord Games, chair of the IGDA Foundation, and actually just finished his PhD in AI, our notoriously busy next speaker always seems to find the time for us, and we're so happy for that. So please welcome Luke Dicken, everyone.
Well, I say this every year, but this time for real, if you could lower your expectations a bit. So I want to have a word with whoever put the schedule together today. Because we started out the morning with, obviously, smiley, happy Emmy, and then we moved on to me, who's completely the other thing. So for the last couple of years, I've been coming over to you guys, and I've been talking about AI in games and kind of how we can design better games and build better AI into our games. And when I was approached about coming over this year, I was like, well, I haven't really got anything new to say. And what I decided was that I was going to do something completely fucking strange. And something that it's a talk I've been wanting to give for a long time because I kind of want to sort of dig deep and try and find meaning from a really dark period in my life. So today we're going to be talking about everything I know about leadership I learned from EVE Online. No, it's not a woo kind of talk. Okay, so as Ingvild's just said, I am a former PhD student. I submitted my thesis on Friday and I am done. And I am the former chair of IGDA Scotland. I finished up there a couple of weeks ago. And I'm actually the former founder of Robot Overlord Games because we're in the process of wrapping that up. And you'll see why in a minute, but I'm still a director for the International Game Developers Association, and I still head up the IGDA Foundation, which is the charitable side of the IGDA's activities. And the reason things are coming to a bit of a close is that in a couple of weeks, eventually, when the paperwork is all through, I'm moving to San Francisco, and I'm going to be a senior data scientist at Zynga. So that's a lot of fun. However, in the spirit of working for the man and corporations, I figured that when we started this, we really needed some disclaimers. So, what I'm going to be talking about today does not represent the views or opinions or practices of anybody who I'm involved with other than me. And quite frankly, it doesn't really represent my policies, practices, or opinions. It's just something I'm saying up here. And of course, any resemblance to persons living or dead in this reality or any other reality is purely coincidental, except when it's not. And if you think I'm talking about you on the stream, I probably am. And more than anything today, what we're going to be doing, like I said at the beginning, is we're kind of trying to work through some of my issues and find some meaning. So basically, I'm now swearing you all in as doctors. This is a therapy session, and now this is you're sworn to confidentiality. So here's one of the things that people tend not to know about me. I haven't always been called Luke. And there was a long period where I went by various names, as we do when we live on the internet. But for a long time, I was this guy. I was Ethrak. This isn't what he looked like at the time. They changed the avatar system in EVE, and it completely got fucked up. And this is just the generic one, because they deleted my picture. And I don't have a copy of it because I was like 20 when I was doing this stuff. And I didn't keep files, because why am I going to need that in 10 years' time? Anyway, so for a long time I was this guy, and I was the leader of a thing called the Cold Fusion Syndicate. And for almost 6 years I ran a guild inside of EVE, and in EVE a guild is called a corporation, and the corporation that I ran was called LiveTech. And kind of I want to just dive into the middle of it and tell you what happened in 2007. So it was 4 a.m. And I was sat there at my computer, and I was jacked up on far more caffeine and adrenaline and endorphins than is advisable for 12 people, never mind one. But I finally had it. I had what I was looking for, and I was staring at this. And what I was staring at was a satellite photo. And it was a satellite photo of a guy's house. And this is where the fucker lived, right? This is where this guy lived who'd betrayed us, and he'd completely screwed us over, and he'd caused us a month of problems. But now I knew where he lived. I told you it was a dark time. I warned you going in. Um, See, what he'd done was that before he decided to screw us, he'd sent me some money to pay for our Ventrilo server. This was back when we had Ventrilo servers, so we're going back a bit. And he'd done that through PayPal, so I had his full name. So from there, it actually was kind of easy to find out where he lived. And this is kind of the thing about Eve, right? It kind of sucks you in. And within a month of this kind of 4 a.m. revelation that, well, that now looking back on it was maybe a little bit extreme, we'd actually be running an intelligence operation ourselves, and we'd be running a false flag surrender campaign. And within 2 months of that, we'd be taking this major step and setting up this brand new organization within the game. And when it came time to close that organization, we would actually find that the in-game news found it noteworthy, and they would actually write about us closing this new organization. And of all the moments of sort of 6 years of playing and organizing within Eve, nothing kind of describes the game better than this memory. This kind of pivotal moment where somebody has betrayed you to a point where the real and the virtual intersect, and maybe that wasn't actually so healthy to be invested to that degree. Of course, it would be about 3 years until I actually worked that out and took a step back, but that's a whole other story. So, how many of you know what Eve is? How many of you encountered, oh, fucking hell, right, okay, everybody, shit. Okay, well, that makes the next slide kind of redundant. Okay, so everybody has probably seen a screen like this. Okay, so Eve is a game about sort of online MMO spaceships, basically, kind of. But it's also a game about stuff like this. Because at the end of the day, what Eve is more than anything is a capitalism simulator. And it is a very sort of great societal representation of how bleak the world can be in a capitalist society. And if you think that's an exaggeration, go play it and then come to me after you've finished crying. Eve, like I say, the guilds in Eve are structured around what they call corporations, and what's kind of different and novel about corporations is that they can tax their members, and that they have shares. So you can be a shareholder in a guild, effectively. And that's really interesting as a mechanic. And it's really poorly explained, or it was back in these days, so we had no fucking idea how it worked, or what it meant, or what actually could be done, and this led to a lot of problems. So, it all started in 2005. I thought it would be a good idea to play this game. Don't know what the hell I was thinking. And I started playing, and within about 2 days, you get kind of pushed into kind of this thing that's basically the guild recruitment channel, and there's people in there saying, oh, come join my group's awesome, we give you buddies. And you have to kind of wade through and try and pick the group that you kind of want to do, and the game is pushing you to join up with a player-run guild. And I got talking with this one guy, and he had some interesting things to say, and I mean, I didn't know what the hell I was talking about, but, for where I was and kind of the amount that I knew about the game, he sounded like he knew what he was talking about. It sounded like it was going to be a good deal. So I became the second person to join this guild. There's laughter in the room already, and you're not wrong. Within 2 weeks of joining, the guy who decided to set it up had just disappeared. And that left me in this awkward position where I don't know what I'd been doing at the time, but I guess I was on holiday from uni, so I'd been kind of promoting this thing. I'd been like, oh, you should come and join us, we're going to be so great, it's going to be this, that, the other. I don't know what these words mean, but sure. And then the guy who was going to make it all happen disappeared, and it was just me. And I'd got these guys who kind of were coming through, looking to me, and I didn't want to let them down. So I started kind of getting into things and kind of building it up. And by the time we finished, we had about 250 active players spread across 5 corporations. We banded 5 corporations together as an alliance. We were somewhere in the top third of all the Eve alliances. Eve runs on just one server, so that's kind of... it makes the numbers a little bit weird when you compare it to kind of WoW stuff, but that is kind of significant for Eve. And we did that for 6 years. And we actually became a major economic player in local markets. And And kind of the level of investment, I think, is best demonstrated by this video. So this is put together by me. And what I want you to bear in mind as you're watching this is that this is a 5-year-old video. This goes back to a time when videos and games were not something that people made. And these guys were all invested and they wanted to make a recruitment video for our group. So they put together this thing. And they got everybody flying their ships and they got like parade formations put together and all this stuff. And this was long before we had Twitch, long before we had any of these kind of streaming sites. These guys barely had fraps and they were managing to kind of pull it all together and build this thing that kind of really shows a lot about who we are and what we stood for. But mostly that we kind of had too much time on our hands. So I'll let that carry on playing as I talk a little bit about this because it's a couple of minutes long and I don't want to just bore you by making you watch the whole thing because although, like, so the day that I got the footage for this video, I got a brand new laptop as well. And I opened my laptop up and I got this new shiny screen and I played the video and the Eve graphics were so amazingly good and then you look at it 5 years later and you think, that's pretty garbage. But anyway, yeah, so, I mean, we had all these people doing all these things and we had regular events and we were doing these things on a regular basis. And kind of what I want to tell you about today is how we got to that point. Screw it, it's not that interesting. Basically, what I want to tell you is that my time in Eve made me a better manager, but it also made me a better leader, and those are two very different things. And today, indie developers really don't have the luxury of being bad leaders. Like, you have to be getting it right first time, because at the end of the day, you are gambling with your livelihoods. And if you get it wrong, you are so screwed. And I hope that by kind of explaining some of the things that we did, and some of the reasons that we made the choices we did, and some of the epic fails we had, that you can kind of take away something that is going to apply to challenges that you might face. At least that's the justification that I'm telling myself I'm doing this for. Really, I just want to get this shit out of my head. So starting out, you know, I told you that I was 2 days into the game when I started becoming, like, forced into this leadership role. So one of the things that you need to know is that being clueless is completely okay. You know, there is no need when you set up your indie team to have all the answers. In fact, if you think you have all the answers, you're probably a danger to yourself and others. Go out and find people who have been there and done that. Read up on it, research it, play about, see what you can find out. For us, like the CEO interface for how you work with corporations was, like I said, it was so poorly documented that we couldn't do anything but try and find people who'd kind of played around and been burnt and not had it work out. And it was kind of humbling because, I mean, you're there to play a video game, right? But at the same time, you're having to admit that you just are so far out of your depth. And that can be kind of emotional, and it's probably a lot more so when you're having to admit that about the thing that you've always wanted to do. I've always wanted to make a game. Oh shit, I don't know how to run a team. I don't know how to do my taxes. I don't know how to do any of this stuff. Find people, ask, talk to people. And then you're going to need people to join up to your cause, right? As a guild leader, you certainly do, but as a kind of indie, unless you're making something very small, very compact, you know, you can do it as a one-man band, but generally you need a small team. So you need to be doing outreach, you need to be doing messaging, you need to be listening to Emmy. But at the end of the day, this is what it comes down to, right? I mean, we couldn't have got to where we were if we'd not actually put together a website within, like, the first week. And we needed to have that. We needed to be telling people, this is what we're trying to do. This is where we're trying to get to. This is what we want to achieve. And part of that comes down to the next slide. And the next slide has kind of two sides to it. Because community management. Now, Lee talked about community management yesterday. And everything he said is right. But at the same time, the public and the games and the gamers, they are not your only community. Because inside of your studio, you have a community, and you need to be checking in with those guys. And this is something that over the last kind of 2 months, this has been really important to me and to the people that I kind of associate with, we check in with each other a hell of a lot more because of what's going on in the industry. And a phrase like, I would always say, oh, hey, how you doing? That has now taken on a new meaning because we need to actually be taking each other's temperature. How are you doing? There is a different tone to that question now. You need to know how your people are doing as a leader. You need to know what is going on with them, and the things that they might not open up about, the things that they might not be willing to talk about, you need to have a sense for who they are. And, when they suddenly start eating salads every day, what's going on with you? Why are you not on pizza? Things like that are, seriously, these are cues that there's something wrong with your people, and you need to be kind of engaging with them on that level, because otherwise your team's not working right. So, the big thing about leadership, the big thing that I still struggle with to this day, is this difference between knowing stuff and doing stuff. I always want to be the guy doing things. I think that's probably deep-seated only child kind of stuff, but I might have called it a therapy session, but let's not go too deep on that. But at the end of the day, I want to be the guy who's actually making shit happen, because ultimately, I trust me to get things done, and I kind of don't trust anybody else. And if I give it to somebody, I expect it to kind of not come in the way I want it, or the way that I would do it myself. Knowing what you want to achieve is really good. Doing it gets to be really bad, because you need to be delegating. You need to be giving your people things to do, and not then coming in and saying, hey, that's not how it should be done. Let me, I'm going to take it off you and I'm going to do it. That's a really big thing, yeah? Because you can't do everything, and you brought these people in because you can't do everything and you needed them to do stuff. So actually let them do stuff. And like I say, I still struggle with this today. I would much rather be handling the Twitter presence for the IGDA stuff that I organize, or, doing this, doing that, but I can't do it all. And more importantly, these days, I don't want to do it all. There's a part of me that's really tired. But you've got to let people do things. And then you've got to oversee them, and that doesn't mean micromanagement. You've got to give people the space to do things in their own way and let them go at it. So in the video, you might have seen that we had 5 logos at the bottom of the thing. And there were 5 corporations inside Cold Fusion Syndicate. Each one had a CEO, each one was managed in its own way. There were broad kind of structures in place as to how that would work and kind of what the broad rules were. But after that, you can't be involved. You've got to trust that the people that you're kind of letting do things are going to get it done. And, it's going to destroy the experience if you're sitting over the shoulder. And that is always going to be a problem. So you have to step back, and you have to give people the space. And you have to accept that sometimes they're going to drop the ball. Sometimes they're not going to do it the way you need it to be done. And that's okay, because ultimately maybe you weren't right. But that's another slide. The thing that I got really passionate about in Eve was analytics. And it kind of falls in with the oversight thing. Because at the end of the day, if you have metrics on things that are happening, you can do oversight really well and really hands-off. Because you can kind of see that everything is running smoothly. The ship is working fine, because here are all the numbers, here's where we expected them to be, boom, done. Analytics are really powerful, and in Eve they are supremely powerful. The fact that we could log so much data about what was happening in that game, I firmly believe is probably what's put me in the mindset for this gig that I'm going to at Zynga. So there is a web browser inside of Eve that allows you to expose an awful lot of data about the player to the web server that you're contacting. So that meant that we could actually see where you were in the game, what your character was, what ship you were flying, stuff like that. And from that, we could actually start to build up sort of a big data set on where all our people had been, what they'd been doing, kind of make inferences about that. And generally, we didn't need to look at it, right? I mean, generally, we didn't need to be the big brother looking over your shoulder. But when things went down, we could. And we were able to use data mining techniques to actually discover that we had spies inside our corporation just before a war kicked off. it all sounds kind of dumb right now, but these analytic techniques, learning to do this kind of stuff in a situation where it absolutely made toss all difference to anything, and we could all quit and go home anytime we wanted. It made it so much more able to kind of engage with it because it was something that we could tackle. We could look at this, we could play about with it, and if it didn't work, it didn't work. But you can do stuff like, operations research. Who's heard of operations research? Really, nobody. Okay, okay, one. So operations research is it's kind of very similar to AI, but it's very more mathsy, and business has kind of adopted it a hell of a lot more than they have AI. So a lot of it is kind of buzzwordy, but it comes down to the same stuff. Optimizations and efficiencies. And again, these kinds of analytics that we were logging in Eve, same kind of thing. Manufacturing processes, we could make it more efficient. We could look at the markets and make predictions about what was going to happen. But we couldn't do that if we didn't have the manpower. And retaining the people and making the people keep going was always the really, really big thing for us. And we couldn't do that without one rule to rule them all, and that is that you are not above the rules. As a leader, there is always a temptation to kind of have rules for people, and then, oh, well, I'll just bend them, I'll just break them all. Yeah, but I can get away with it. No, you can't. Because as soon as you start disrespecting the rules, everybody starts disrespecting the rules. Everybody's going to bend them, everybody's going to break them. Doesn't apply to me. Oh, I'm only doing that. Oh, yeah, well, maintaining discipline is always really important. And that sounds really harsh. It's coming from me, so it is really harsh, but putting it into the context of an indie studio, it makes it seem like, oh, it's going to all go dictatorial and fascist. I'm not saying that would be a bad thing. But at the end of the day, right, it's important that everybody knows that they're playing to the same rule book. It's important that everybody can kind of see that you're all going to be coming out at the end of the day on a level. Some people are going to be paid a little bit more. You're the leader, you'll be paid a little bit more, let's get down to specifics. But at the end of the day, you can't be disrespectful to the people that are working for you. And breaking the rules and kind of saying it doesn't apply to me is so disrespectful, but also, it's also like violating what you stand for. So, the other thing about rules that I always find to be very, very kind of good advice is make them just flat blanket. No qualifications. No, if you're doing blah, 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 then it's okay. No, it's not okay. It's never okay. And then there is no gray area. There is no, oh, well, there's no negotiation. This is the rule. Job's done. And if you can kind of set up your culture in such a way that everybody knows that, and they know where they stand, and they know what the deal is, then you're going to have a much more, certainly in my experience anyway, and that's not necessarily like the de facto thing, but I find you're always going to find that everybody knows where they stand more. And as a leader, it's always important to kind of find your voice. We talk about this as a writer, right? Finding your voice as a writer. As a leader, it's at least as important, but I find it's not necessarily talked about as much. I don't know if you've noticed, but I'm kind of angry and sweary. That is my voice. That is kind of the way that I interact with basically the entire world. And I don't apologize for that. Well, I do sometimes. Around my folks occasionally. But the point is, I know that that's who I am, and that's okay, because that is always going to be, you know where you stand with me, because if I'm not really in your face shouting at you, probably okay. But the other thing that you've got to do is find the funny. Finding the funny is always really important, because if you can't laugh at what's going on, if you can't laugh at yourself, then nobody else is going to laugh with you. And if nobody is laughing, then you're in a really shitty place. Laughter is the best medicine is a terrible cliche, but it's true, right? At the end of the day, when we're playing Eve, we're getting people to spend money on their Eve subscription to come and play a video game, and they could just go and not do that. They could go and play Farmville. Farmville is free. That sounds like I'm shilling for the man, I apologize. But the point is, we've got all these free-to-play games, and even back then they were starting to come out, and yet people would pay a subscription fee to come and get shouted at by me. And I still don't really understand what that was about. But finding the funny is really important. Having that kind of sense that you can laugh about it, and, because those guys are giving up their free time. You guys are giving up your 9 to 5. And if you can't laugh 9 to 5, not necessarily all the time, because that would just be a little bit manic, but if you can't kind of find those moments of humor, it's not fun anymore. And if it's not fun, why the hell are you doing it? Go flip burgers. If you're flipping burgers, then at least you've got a skill. If you're kind of, an actual kind of physical skill, you've got a bit of hand-eye coordination going on. If you're writing code, code is horrible. Have you ever actually sat back and looked at code? Why would anybody write that? So being able to kind of relate to people in this kind of raw, honest, funny kind of way is always really good, and knowing where you're coming from. So that everybody is, again, it's the same thing as with rules. Effectively, you're setting up a rule for how you're going to interact with them. I'm going to swear at you, sorry, and I probably don't mean it, unless I do. But you'll know when I do, because I'll be really fucking shouting. And I will stick to that rule throughout, and that is how it works. And if you like it, you can sign on, and if you don't like it, there's the door. But you know at least where you stand then. So part of that finding your voice thing, owning it. I talk to a lot of devs, and I talk to a lot of kind of studio leaders. And the thing, particularly among studio leaders, the thing that I hear more than anything is excuses. And they're not sort of dog ate my homework, but in a way they kind of are. Oh, we didn't get to so-and-so because of blank. And we didn't, and there is no kind of ownership of, these were the problems, this is why it happened, let's move on. It's always kind of, well, it wasn't really our fault because, it absolutely was your fault. And as the leader, everything is your fault, okay? Even if somebody else fucks up, you trusted them, so it's your fault. And that is a harsh thing, but it's true. And you have to be prepared to admit that. Probably don't walk up to them and say, it's my fault because I trusted you, because that's just not going to work out so well. But you kind of have to be prepared to own it. To say, yeah, okay, we made a bad call. That didn't work out. You heard Lee yesterday talking about the things that they learned from Kickstarter at Double Fine. That's owning it. That is going, yeah, all right, we made all these mistakes. And it's not trying to go, oh, well, they didn't really understand what we were trying to do. No, we fucked up the messaging. They didn't really, oh, well, but, it always comes back to us. Own it. And then when the time comes, move on. And move on in a better way than I did. So, I told you about my sort of dark 4 a.m. moment. And it was the beginning of sort of one thing, and it was kind of the start of it changing in my head as to what it was, because I was too invested in this thing. And I kind of didn't want to be that guy anymore, but I had an obligation to follow through, because I kind of feel like if you set up a guild, you need to see it through, and I don't really know why, because lots of people just piss off into the sunset, but never mind. But the time came that it was time for me to kind of move on and do something else. And I left the game. And I just said, right, look, guys, so-and-so's going to take over. Have a chat with so-and-so before you do that, because that could end badly. But, and then I'm done. I'm not playing this game anymore. I want to do something else with my time. That was a really poor choice on my part. Not because I left the game, but because I kind of set it up in such a way that everybody could still come to me. So when so-and-so wasn't actually doing a great job, and things were kind of going badly, everybody was able to come to me and say, oh, Luke, you've got to come back. And I did. And that is probably, it only lasted 6 months, but it was a really bad thing for me to do, because it undermined everybody who'd been trying to build this thing. They'd been working as hard as they could, and it turns out And I don't want to, this is going to sound a little bit egotistical, but it turns out they weren't as good as me on some metrics, according to some people. And by coming back, I completely undermined what they were trying to do. I completely fucked it up. And to be honest, I didn't enjoy the next 6 months, and I was always already looking for an exit strategy. And it turns out that the way you quit Eve, if anybody needs a tip, you kill your character, you sell your stuff, you basically salt the earth so that you can never go back. Because after you've put 6 years into a character, you don't want to start over from scratch anymore. Job's done. I never want to touch this game ever again. Because while that character is sat there, there's always that little kind of, oh, well, I could just don't. Just say no. So there is actually a quote that I kind of have always kind of kept in the back of my mind. It's from one of my favorite TV shows, and it says, here's the thing about change. Sometimes you think that you've changed, but you haven't. And what you've done is you've traded one addiction for another. And sometimes that's the best you can hope for. And I came out of Eve, and I kind of took all this stuff that I'd learnt about volunteering, and I kind of started working for the IGDA, and within 3 years I was kind of running the IGDA as one of the directors. And now I wake up in the middle of the night and check my email to see what's going on with the IGDA. And I was up till 4 o'clock this morning dealing with Skype messages about the IGDA. And I haven't actually learned a damn thing about all the things that I kind of wanted to learn coming out of Eve, and I have just traded one addiction for another. I'm just running another organization. It's just not a virtual one this time. But yeah, so I don't know. I'm kind of coming to the end of things here. But kind of what I wanted to end on, I think, unless I've got more slides. This is a quote from an article, the article that got written when I left. And I don't know if anything that I've been telling you over the last sort of 40 minutes has actually had an impact, gonna help you or anything. But what I will always remember is that when it came down to it, this was a quote from one of the people that I'd been working with. And, that's not nothing. And if I can make that kind of impact on that one person, that's the quote that they put into the news article, then maybe some of this stuff works. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe I'm just lying to myself. I don't know. Like I said, this is a therapy session. This is me working through this stuff. You thought I was kidding, but I really wasn't. And there is always a but. There has to be a but, right? Because at the end of the day, my work style works for me so far. And so far is really important because this whole roller coaster could come crashing down around me tomorrow. And just doing what I did and trying to emulate my success and going out and making an Eve account today might not work out for you. I mean, it might. Good luck to you for many, many reasons, not least of which is playing Eve. But consider these issues, right? Consider the things that I've brought up. Consider how you interact with your team, with your people, with your community, with your broader community. What rules and culture are you fostering inside of your studio? Is it actually what you want it to be? Or are you kind of taking shortcuts? Are you kind of making excuses? Are you saying, well, the rules don't really apply to me? Find what works for you. Something will work for you. And I've tried to signpost where I went and how I did it, because I would hate to see everybody in this room crash and burn the way that I did in Eve a few times. We had to rebuild that shit from the ground multiple times. But don't do that. Try and succeed. I'm sure you don't need that advice. But be awesome. So that's pretty much the whole of the content. I feel like it was a little bit content light, but I hope you got something out of it. And of course, it wouldn't be a talk without plugs and promos at the end. So the IGDA Foundation is one of my addictions right now. It's a charity by game developers for game developers. You can find out more information at foundation.igda.org. And I've got my AI workshop today where I'm actually going to be talking about technical stuff, but you're going to come to me with your questions because I didn't want to just come up here and kind of tell you what problems you should be solving. So you come to me, tell me about your games, tell me what your problems are with AI, and I will help you fix them, maybe. And you can find me on Twitter, you can find me on my website, which I do not update often enough, and you can always get hold of me on email. And if you have questions, we have actually quite a bit of time, so.
It's actually almost 40 minutes until lunch, so, but do you want to talk
Oh, I should have done that, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because we have a lot of time, so if you want to do that.
Okay. I don't have a slide deck for that. Hang on. Let's see what I can do. So the Scholars Program is a program run by the Foundation, which I really should have been promoting to you already, and I shouldn't have had to be prompted, but I was. So, which way, is that the way? Yes. Yeah, that's really not the way. Let's see what happens if I do that. Okay, that's close enough. So, the IGDA Scholarships is for students. How many students do we have in the room right now? Oh, loads of students. Excellent. So some of you have probably heard about this. We've had a few Norwegian scholars come through the program. It is an opportunity to get an all-access pass to one of several conferences. This year we're intending to run at GDC, E3, GDC Europe, Tokyo Game Show, and CDEC. And you get your all-access pass, and then you get to do all sorts of shiny stuff. So in many recent years, we have visited Double Fine when we're in GDC. If you go to Tokyo, you're probably not going to visit Double Fine. But you get to do studio tours. You get an individual mentor from the industry to kind of work with you and guide you through the conference a little bit. We try and arrange some sort of Q&A sessions with senior industry figures. The application process right now is open for GDC. That's going to close on the 2nd of December. You're going to be evaluated based on some mini essays, and I will show you the criteria for... So you have to be an IGDA member, you have to be over 18, you have to be a student, and you have to have not won scholarships before or not won more than 2. And we're going to judge you based on relevance, initiative, engagement, and communication, and those are the 4 kind of criteria. So will attending the event actually help you to achieve your career goals? Be very specific in your career goals as you're describing them. I want to get into the games industry, not so much a career goal. Tell us why, tell us where, tell us how. Initiative, have you actually done things and gone above and beyond? Engagement, are you kind of engaging with the community? Excuse me, with the community and kind of volunteering and helping out at events like this. And communication, like how are you expressing yourself? That one's a little bit tough. Like I would imagine for most people in this room, communication isn't really a problem. But obviously with English being a second language, I mean, for you guys, it's basically like almost a second first language. So, but we do kind of try and take that into account as we're going through. Like I say, application deadline for that is 2nd of December. We are going to be picking students. You'll have about 2 months before GDC. You'll find out that you're going. The only thing we can't cover is flights and accommodation. Unfortunately, that's like the big expense. But I promise it would be worth it. Like, I don't care if you have to sell a kidney, it's worth it. I don't care if you have to sell both your kidneys and come with a machine, it's worth it. So I started out with the scholarship program at E3 in 2011, and then I got Casual Connect and GDC in 2012. And without those, I would not be anywhere close to where I am today in my career. This thing has kick-started me completely. And it's introduced me to people who, like, you're a scholar, so they kind of take you seriously. I mean, most people take you seriously anyway because you're a person and they're a person. But, it gives you a little bit more legitimacy, and it gives you more of a reason for people to kind of stop and say, oh, hey, you're a scholar, let's talk. It's a fantastic opportunity. I think we have 3 Norwegian scholars in the room right now, if they would like to make themselves known. Okay, well, there's 1, 2. Is Anders in here? Okay, there we go. So, talk to these guys when I'm gone. Talk to me if you want. I mean, you can talk to me, but talk to these guys. They'll tell you like the actual true facts about it rather than the propaganda. But yeah, if you're a student, you'd be crazy not to apply. Has that padded some more time? Okay.
So, but we still have about half an hour for questions. If you.
Oh shit! Well, I'm going to sit on a chair. So, have we got any questions?
Let me just get the mics ready.
Okay. In fairness, there didn't seem to be a lot of hands shooting up, so.
questions?
Kind of related to the scholar thing, I was just wondering if you could talk a bit about the different conferences and how they differ, like how E3 would be compared to GDC. Like,
Yeah, okay. That's actually a really good question, because I think that a lot of that is just kind of assumed when you've kind of been kicking around for a couple of years. So GDC is the Game Developers Conference, and the kind of main focus of that is going to be talks. And it is session. It's a huge event. It's the biggest gathering of game developers on the planet, according to the literature. And I don't even know how many tracks they run. Does anybody? 5? Or was that a wave or a number?
You mean how many total?
Yeah. No, how many tracks? Like how many concurrent?
There's visual arts, programming, design, business, production, advocacy. So I think there's 6 now.
Okay. So 6 tracks. We've got 2 days of summits where there's all sorts of stuff specifically to a discipline. So I think there's an animation day and there's an AI day.
And technical artist boot camp and physics and AI.
Somebody get Lee a microphone.
Hello. Yeah, so I actually work with the GDC advisory
Well,
board.
that's why when you started sort of showing interest, I thought, hey, there's the guy.
Yeah, so there's boot camps and summits the first few days before the conference starts. And those are kind of a deep dive on specifics. So they change a little bit each year, but typically there's like an AI boot camp and a physics boot camp. There's always an animation boot camp, a technical artist boot camp. I think this year we're actually going to do an art direction one. So we've got like all the art directors in the industry you've probably heard of coming there. And yeah, then there's the main conference itself, which I think probably all heard, but we have those sort of 6 tracks there. And that's a combination of speaking and panels and roundtables and yeah, live demos.
So that's GDC. So that's GDC according to the GDC info. When you've got 20,000 game developers all in kind of a couple of square blocks, there's a lot of other stuff happening around the sides. So although your pass gets you, so as a scholar you get an all access pass. So what we tend to say to people is, well, you're going to get access to the vault. So take meetings, meet people, go for coffee, hang out, have a conversation. Because like the fact that there's 20,000 of us in one kind of very small area, like imagine how you guys feel today in this room, and you're going to walk outside, and people that you kind of catch up to once a year, or maybe you see them every few months or something, and they're all there. Right? Imagine that on a global scale, and that's what GDC is. So it's very educational. It's very kind of centered around kind of the kind of professional development, but at the same time, it's also kind of a little bit of a carnival of kind of everybody catching up with everybody and kind of hanging out. And you know, you might not have seen this person since you got fired, but now you can catch up at GDC. And already, like I would imagine, the same is true for everybody going to GDC. I'm making plans for who I'm going to be. Oh, I'll catch up to you at GDC, and it's like 5 months away, but like that's the big place where you're going to see everybody. So that's GDC. Brilliant event. E3 is very different. E3 is a trade show. And what that means is that you're going to see all the shinies, and you're going to get to sort of experience the cult of games. And by the end of it, you will be fucking sick of games. If you do, don't ever in 1 year do E3, Gamescom, and Eurogamer, because at the end of it, you'll just want to kill yourself. You think I'm joking, but so E3 is a trade show. It's very focused on kind of the hype and the marketing and all that kind of stuff. There's very few devs around. There are some, so you get to hang out with some people and catch up. But it's mostly focused on kind of the more PR-facing kind of stuff. And although it's an industry show, like a lot of what they're showing it's very consumer-facing, but in a kind of very kind of consumer-facing way, really. But it's nice and quiet because technically they only let industry people in, but it seems like that gets a bit kind of fuzzy around the edges sometimes. So that is E3. So GDC Europe, kind of more of the same as GDC. but it's a 2-day show. It's a lot smaller. That is a much smaller event, and that is attached to Gamescom. Gamescom is kind of like E3, but they let the public in, so it's mayhem. They get, I think, 300,000 people through the door, and you've never seen crowds like it. And if you've never kind of heard 300,000 German teenagers screaming, that is something to kind of witness. And I can't, does anybody know about TGS or CDEC? No? Anybody? Okay, well, I think TGS is more trade showy, CDEC is more developer conferencey, but I have no real knowledge of them. So those are the sort of big ones. Casual Connect is another one to keep on your radar. Casual Connect is more focused on mobile stuff. We don't run scholarships there, but it's always a good conference. That you can talk about kind of monetization and payment methods, and there'll generally be people from PayPal trying to pitch you their latest thing. It's a good conference, particularly if you're in the mobile space. What else should we have on that list? I'm looking at experts.
GDC next.
Oh, okay, well, that's you shilling for the man, so you take the mic and do you want to say something about it, or just, because I don't know.
Oh, yeah. There's just another conference. So, E3 is down in LA, GDC's in San Francisco. GDC Next is I think it's 3 years old now. They're just about, their show's not happened yet this year, but it was a merging of two different conferences. That was GDC Austin and a mobile focus. So it's kind of more focused on mobile social space than GDC is typically. And kind of, they're trying to focus on what's next on the horizon. So I spoke there once. It's much smaller than GDC, and even, I think it's probably about the size of GDC Europe. But if you're really in that particular space, it might be worth thinking about going there.
Cool. Okay, does that answer the question to a sufficient degree? Awesome, we're getting a nod from at the top. So, are there any more questions? Lynn has a question.
Well, while you're at it, maybe you could talk a little bit about what the IGDA Foundation is.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good question, and it's not one that I actually have a great answer to. So this is a charity that was set up. So because American tax law is kind of screwy, you can have a organization that is called a 501c6. And a C6 is allowed to lobby governments. So when the IGDA was set up, that was kind of the classification that it got put into. However, as a C6, you are not able to have tax-deductible donations, which for a kind of non-profit members organization seems like a bit of a weakness. So what got set up was this thing called the IGDA Foundation, and that was set up in 2008. And it's focused on, it's a charity, it's focused on sort of scientific and education kind of works, and basically what we try and do is support the game development community in any way we can, given that nobody knows about us and nobody ever gives us money. I'm a little bit jealous of the auction last night because, having done the math in my head, that's more money than I've raised this year, and you did it in one night. So yeah, so I mean, I got parachuted in as the chair of this thing in April. So I've spent the last 6 months trying to change that around a little bit. We have a website that actually doesn't look like horseshit anymore, and we have a Twitter feed, and as of last weekend, we have a Facebook page. So things are changing. The messaging is getting out there. More people are kind of being reached, and what we want to do is kind of get to a point where we have enough money that we can make a big difference. So the scholarships right now, the conference scholarships are funded through the foundation. But what I want to see is kind of more tuition scholarships, more kind of engagement there, and also more support. You know, I would love it in an ideal world if we could support an event like this that's supporting a community, you know, that we just don't have a particular reach to. But like, you guys are set up already, right? You don't need kind of the IGDA to come in and fix things. What you really need is to come and say, you know, we've got this thing, we've got a community, we've got a great event. What we need is some money to make it work. And there needs to be more support for events like that. So that's kind of where I'm trying to get it to. But I am really busy, and it's not necessarily always working out or always at the top of my priority list. But you should feel free to send me money. And you should feel free to get in touch if you'd like to help out with that. I could pull up the website. Or maybe oh, there we go. So that should be, and this one is actually responsive, so it should all, well, okay, it's going to just go to 2 rows on the menu, I guess. Yeah, so the warm fuzzy, hey, I'm the chair of the thing, look at my face thing that I'm really uncomfortable about. So at the moment we support the IGDA scholarships, the Dicken AI scholarship, which is a memorial scholarship honoring one of the core members of the AI community who died maybe, I don't know, 8 years ago or so. And I was actually a recipient of that when I went to GDC, and that's kind of how I got involved with the organization and kind of came through more. And we also do this thing, which right now we call it the Chapter and SIG grants, and we kind of award money to the IGDA chapters around the world, but I think that should be broadened out to include, you guys here, places where there doesn't need to be a chapter, and there's still a need for developers to get together and do stuff. Yeah, so you can click that button there, which is the important one, and that's just going to take you to a thing where you can actually pick how we use your money, and then just PayPal donate, and yeah, anything you can spare would be greatly appreciated. That got a little bit desperate at the end there. Oh, okay, so while this is on screen, Game Outcomes Project is looking for, it's like a survey, and it's looking for like the outcome of projects, and it wants to assess like failed projects and successful projects. You can find more information on that on the IGDA Foundation Twitter feed, which is @IGDA Foundation. That's really all I know about it, but I told the guy that I would promote it, so I now have done that. There is actually a question, and I think I answered enough about the foundation that you know it's awesome and you know you should give me money, right? Well, there's a guy.
Hi. Yeah, first I just wanted to say that I really enjoyed your presentation last year.
Yes.
So, yeah. So,
sounds about right. Sounds
so I was just wondering, just for people who went there, you were talking about AI usage in games and which games were doing interesting things with AI now and which games were getting a lot of attention for doing interesting things with AI but weren't necessarily that interesting. Like, I think you mentioned BioShock and stuff like that.
Yes.
I was wondering if you had like an update to the stuff you...
I do. Come to the workshop. No, so I did a session on Wednesday at one of the universities here, and what I was talking about there was a lot on Shadows of Mordor. So Shadows of Mordor is doing some really interesting stuff, and it's probably not that complicated underneath the hood. But it's interesting and it's pushing the envelope. What's interesting is that Destiny, if you go and look at the AI in Destiny is fucking, it's atrocious, right? All they do is run towards you or duck behind a stone. It's literally all the enemies do. And yet it works. So I think that really the update to last year's talk is, same again, Destiny on one side, Shadows of Mordor on the other. And that's actually a talk that I gave on Wednesday of this week.
Hi. As somebody who tried to get into coding and begin on a hobby, not a hobby, but a hobby, hobby level, where would you recommend going from there? And tell us kind of how you began coding.
Badly. No, seriously. So I started coding when I was very small. I had a Atari ST when I was about 5 years old. My mum was a coder and my dad was an IT manager, so like from the get-go, like computers were just around me. And I started coding in BASIC, and it turns out that I don't really know much about BASIC, and it's not really a great language for doing stuff. And also I was about 7, so cut me some slack a little bit. But then I went to uni and I started working on Java, because Java was what was taught on my undergrad program, and I did not fucking get it. What is this about? And it took failing first year, well, kind of failing first year, almost failing first year, and my flatmate kind of not really knowing how many times I looked over his shoulder as we were working on assessments. And eventually, I kind of got to a place where I understood it. I think that there is almost no substitute for practice. Because if you don't understand the principles of what you're doing, you can read about them and read about them and read about them, and you're still not going to understand the principles of what you're doing. I've got a book on group theory. Does anybody know group theory in math? Couple of hands. Right, you're all one up on me because I've read this book I don't know how many times. No idea. And this is when I say I failed first year, right? I failed first year because I didn't understand, like, no clue about this thing. I'm just looking at it going, I don't get it. And to this day, I still don't get it. And no matter how many times I look at this book, maybe it's just a shit book, but I look at the book and I just don't understand it. So for me, it's more about practice and just diving in, having a go. You've got Unity, you've got all these things now, and you can actually kind of polish up your skills and actually push yourself. You know, game jams are a really good way of doing this because, like, you can kind of learn to code surrounded by people who maybe do know how to code, but also at the same time, like, it doesn't matter if it doesn't work. But then you can, like, push yourself and learn new skills. And one thing that I often do is, like, tech demos of, today I'm going to learn how to make an RTS camera, because I've never actually sat down and made one of those before. And within a couple of days on Unity, you can kind of have, you know, the basic system for an RTS game. All sketched out, put together, right, I understand how that works now. Put it on a shelf. If anybody asks me to do that, I can do it. That's probably what I would suggest that you head down if you want to learn to code. Don't go straight in at the RTS camera. You'll end up really disappointed and not happy. But you maybe started from disappointed and not happy. But, you know, little challenges, add numbers, put it out on the command line, do things, make it, you know, just build yourself up from little Lego blocks and kind of put things together, but never throw anything away. So I made some comment earlier about throwing my files away. I've thrown all my Eve files away, but I still have files going back to my undergrad days and my assessments from there, because one day, in the back of my head, I'm going to go, you know what? I need something that's going to do this. I remember it was in that bit of code I wrote 14 years ago. And you just pop back, look at it, and go, oh, yeah, okay, that's how that works, right. And you're building up like a library of stuff that you can reuse. And it's not always going to be completely applicable, but you can always kind of save yourself some effort by doing that. Although these days, like, you can go on Stack Overflow and find it anyway, so... I always like to look at my code first, but that's because I'm a narcissist.
Yeah, God, we're jumping all over the place with you. But in reference to your talk today, I was just thinking a few years ago, I think it was Joy Ito or something, was talking about how guild leaders from World of Warcraft should post it on their CV and everything because you learn such great management skills and everything. I guess my question is, what's your comment on that? Would you recommend guild leaders from online gaming worlds doing such a thing? Is it...
Know your audience.
Yeah.
Like, if I'm applying for a job as an accountant, for example, and I am interviewing with an elderly... These are really broad generalizations. I'm a little bit ashamed that I'm saying it while the stream's running. But, you know, is who you're pitching to actually going to know what WoW is? You know, if you're going into some crazy startup that's all young people, all very tech-centered, then yeah, they'll know what that is. And they might kind of have an appreciation of the skills that that takes. If they're not, then they won't. And frankly, there is a point, and I'm guilty of this myself. Like, I was reading something recently, and somebody had put, "Oh, yeah, I'm a level 80 Draenor Warlock or something," and I was just like, "Okay." Because I mean, there's a difference there, right? Because the difference is that there is a difference between playing the game, who cares, and organizing the play for a bunch of people, which is a much more kind of significant challenge and a thing that you can actually say, you know, okay, it was a game, but for example, if you were organizing, you know, if you were the captain of the local hockey team and you were organizing that thing. That is something that is understood. And, you know, being that person who's the community organizer is actually valuable. And the fact that it's in a virtual world shouldn't negate that. But it does, to some people, sometimes. So there is no answer. There is only, you know, do what you think is right. Certainly it is sometimes necessary to kind of highlight that. Like for me, for example, on paper, I have no management experience. You know, I kind of came through and I went into the IGDA and I did a bit of volunteering and I did my PhD, which was entirely self-driven. And then I set up my little startup doing consultancy and a bit of game dev. That was entirely self-driven. And then I picked up one person who has been working with me. And we've been kind of partners on this thing, so I didn't actually manage anybody. But if you kind of trace it all back, you can actually pull it apart and say, okay, well, there is actually some level of management kind of experience. And it started here. And okay, these tiny little bits are a reflection of that, and taken as a kind of individual thing, they're not that significant. But they've carried, it's sort of part of a narrative that weaves through. So, like I say, there is no answer. And if you're kind of pitching for a job that isn't kind of, that it's not relevant for, it's probably less relevant to include it.
I was wondering if you have any great recommendations for someone who's kind of new to the game in terms of learning AI, like any books or web pages or blogs or articles or videos or anything that stands out to you as something really great?
Yeah, kind of. There were some really good articles on altdevbloggerday.com.
What did you say?
Alt-dev, well, I'll tell you why it doesn't matter whether you know the link or not, because the site's been dead for 2 months and we don't know when it's coming back. Gamma Sutra is always a good place to start. There are some good books that are kind of more encyclopedic and less kind of getting you from nothing to started. What's a good one? So one that's really good for kind of thinking about stuff is it's called Behavioral Mathematics for Game AI by a guy called Dave Mark. And it is actually, Dave knows that I dislike how much I like his book. Because it's very mathsy and it's very kind of hardcore in a way. But at the same time, it's like teaching you about the philosophy of the AI and how to think about decision-making in games. So even though it's kind of dry in some places and very kind of detailed in others, it's actually really good. And it's well worth a look. And there's always aigamedev.com. Where else? There's some good stuff coming out of the IGDA webinars every second Wednesday of the month, and they're all hosted on YouTube now. So youtube.com/IG, no, not, I don't know. They're on the website somewhere, don't know. And yeah, so that should give you a starting point for kind of moving over. But I would imagine that you kind of have maybe a little bit of background in kind of games, a little bit of background in computer science. Okay, well then, good luck to you.
Back to the topic of the talk. I was wondering if anyone that was looking to take a leader position or start up their own small indie dev company, for example, would you recommend to try to get that leadership experience from like taking leader position in online communities, like a guild or a forum or anything like that?
Yeah, yes, but, or no, because. I think in an ideal world you would do that, and you would kind of, you know, in an ideal world you should get leadership training from somewhere, right? And this is a cheap way of getting it. But maybe you don't have that luxury, and maybe you can't put time into something that's not actually going to pay for you right now. And that's potentially a problem. So, I mean, it's up to you. If you've got the space and kind of the ability to kind of step back and say, you know what, I'm going to do this in a couple of years, but first let me get the skills that I need. You know, absolutely, leadership, marketing, all of these things. You know, learn how to fucking draw. I never did. I can't draw a stick man, and that holds me back a little bit. You know, all of these are really good skills, not to be an expert at, but just to have a bit of knowledge. And if you can put off kind of diving in and needing to fund yourself and needing to actually make a success of it, absolutely do. Unless that's all you want to do in life, in which case you go for it and see what happens. But hang on for a pretty wild ride.
Hey, I have some thoughts I want to take than a question regarding the presentation you hold in the start. I played a game that was like on a browser that was time driven. So like you placed a building and it took 5 hours to build, that type of game, and it was actually quite boring. It wasn't a good game, but in a part of the game, I started joining a guild. It was quite a small guild, but it was really good. The leader there was really into it and driving everybody. It was one of the greatest experiences I've had in games, I feel. And I become quite interested. I stopped playing the game and I started playing the guild. And got into it and got second in command after a while. And then at some point, the leader just quit, said adios, and never came back. And at that point, everything in the guild started collapsing because everybody was pretty much at the same stage. The game wasn't interesting anymore, and now that the leader had left, suddenly the only reason to play this game also left. So I feel it's a bit the same as when you left your thing, and
it could well be. Like I mean, a lot of why we play games is social, right? Particularly like multiplayer games. You look at a game like Destiny, and Destiny's one that I'm talking about a lot because I've been spending a lot of time with it, for good or ill. Destiny, if you play as a solo player, is a really horrific experience. Like it's just, why am I bashing my head against this wall that doesn't want to die, and it doesn't want to give me loot, and it doesn't want to reward me, and it's not a great experience as a single player person. And kind of the mechanics that they've built around that game for discovering new characters and kind of making connections are really quite weak. I've been lucky that I kind of have a group of people who we all had PlayStation 4s, and we were all like, right, day one, Destiny, we're all going to play. And we did. For the first 3 or 4 weeks, we were all in there playing all the time, every minute that we could. And we were all, when we weren't playing, we were on Facebook talking about it. And I've noticed that that's dropped off. You know, we're not talking about it. And when one of us stops playing, we can't make a team of 3 or a team of 6. You know, it suddenly becomes, well, okay, well, I'm not going to bother. You know, do we have 3? Oh, well, okay, then if all of you are going, then I'll play, but I don't really want to play this anymore. It's the same thing, right? The game's not fun anymore. What you're actually doing is enjoying the social interaction with basically your friends. And when that kind of structure starts to fall apart, it kind of all goes off the rails. So Steve Curran on Wednesday night had a comment about local multiplayer. What he said was basically local multiplayer is great until you realize it's an excuse and you've got your friends around, so you might as well just have a pint. And that is actually what's kind of happening here, right? You know, the game becomes an excuse to socialize, and then you're like, but actually this isn't fun anymore. This is, you know, I would rather just socialize. I would rather just talk to you on Facebook while I'm playing a game that I enjoy. I don't know what the solution to that is from a dev point of view, other than kind of making games more engaging, which, hey, there you go, have some wisdom. But, you know, it's something to be kept in mind, right? Because, I mean, it is a common experience. Excellent. Have I filled all my time? Excellent.
Okay, thank you, Luke.